And it's official. We are recording. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all on this Monday evening. Welcome to this last event hosted by the Alaska Angel Conference on how to fund your startup, a rather large question that is helpful to have answered when you're trying to launch a business. So if we think about this evening's topics we'll go through a round of introductions, which you're all happily doing in the chat already, and I encourage you all to message each other as you have questions about businesses. It would be boring if it were just Tammy and I talking all evening, so please ask questions. And if you do, you may raise your hand through Zoom or unmute, interrupt either myself or Tammy, ask your question. Chances are someone else has the exact same question. So let's make this engaging and lively and a good use of everyone's time, since at the end of the day, that's what we're all here about, learn something. We're going to go through what grants, loans, equity are when starting a company, a business, and answer all the questions, lingering questions at the end. At first, I'd like to acknowledge that myself living in Anchorage and working in Anchorage, I have the privilege of being on Dena'ina land. And being in the finance industry, I particularly respect all of the resources that Alaska has bringing to us and the many different economies that we sustain and hope to sustain in the future for many more years to come. Thanks to the folks that have been trustees of this land in the past, the present, and the future. So with that, I will turn it over to Tammy to introduce herself to you all.
As I quickly try and find the unmute button. Hello, everyone. I am Tammy Gray, and I'm here representing the Alaska Small Business Development Center. We're here in Anchorage, but also we have 7 offices statewide. I am also an entrepreneur. I've been a business owner for 13 years here in Alaska and have recently spent about 30 years working in commercial lending and business finance and insurance. So that's a little bit about my background and what I'll be bringing to the conversation here today.
And for myself, I'm Melanie Lucas Conwell. I work for the 49 State Angel Fund within the municipality of Anchorage. I'm a portfolio manager there. Working with Aaron Baca, who is also on this phone call. Fantastic colleague, which I'm very lucky to have. We work with entrepreneurs and investors to grow Alaska's innovation ecosystem. So whether that be homegrown companies within Alaska or bringing outside expertise and knowledge, as well as money, since we all like money, and that's a great thing to have when you're starting a business. Prior to this, I had completed an MBA from the Presidio Graduate School in San Francisco and worked for Google for 7 years on their AdWords advertising platform, helping them make more money, which, well, was a great job, but not as rewarding as my current job. So I'm very happy to be here. One of the things that I get to do is to work on the Alaska Angel Conference, which I think some of you might already know about. And if you have applied or plan to apply for the Angel Alaska Angel Conference, not conflict, thankfully none, please put a thumb up in Zoom so that we can see how many folks are interested in or participating in it this year. All right, a couple of you. Fantastic. Both investors and entrepreneurs. I love it. All sides of the table. So the Alaska Angel Conference, why we even have it in the first place, it's to bring strong startup companies to our state and to build our ecosystem, since we need new innovative ideas and we constantly need to improve what's going on in this wonderful state. We also develop new angel investors, and we'll talk more about what an angel investor is. But we bring in new angel investors as well as seasoned and experienced angel investors to help grow our investor base in Alaska. And so if you want to find out more about that at this moment in time, you're welcome to go to our website, akangelconference.com, and find out more. But I promise you that you'll be hearing a lot more about it at the end of this presentation once we set a lot more context around startup funding. So I thought, being kind of a nerd myself, that I'd throw up some stats about how do startups get their funding. And it turns out most startups start with their own funding at the beginning. So all their personal savings, which you'll see especially in certain types of investments or funding sources, is really important to understand what your own assets are. Most small businesses, well, a third, so actually that's less than half, start off with less than $5,000, which is still sizable, but in some cases, especially software, you can get going pretty fast. Startup capital can be around $10,000 mark, so that might be helpful for you to think about, well, what should I be asking for and what I should be looking for? And for all the craze that it has, venture capital only represents 0.5%, barely, not even, to what startups actually raise. So it's really interesting to think about, well, everyone's looking at venture capital as the answer for their startup and raising their seed round before their Series A, et cetera. Well, it's not always the answer. And for the most part, it is not. But if you do go the venture capital route, the first round of funding you might look at is $2.2 million, which is no small feat. So you have to spend that money somehow and have grand plans for it. And that might take you about 3 years to get to that $2.2 million. So this is a long run thing, not quick money. Really have to be invested in it. And one statistic that I found particularly interesting is that startups with two co-founders rather than one raise 30% more capital. Fun fact. So if you are a solopreneur, nothing wrong with that by any means. It might be interesting to look at who your founding team is and who else you might bring on to complement your own skills and strengths, since we can't do it all, as it turns out. So with that, introducing kind of the 3 areas that we'll dive into this evening. The first one is grants around money that typically governments will give out, or other institutions, maybe nonprofits, foundations, or some corporations, give to individuals or an organization for a particular purpose. So it has very specific uses, and we'll dive into it a little bit more, but not too much, since Tammy is very focused on loans as it comes to her expertise, and as you heard, which is money that is expected to be paid back with interest, and she'll dive a lot more into that topic. And then for myself, I work much more on the equity side of the house. So thinking about this is the value that would be returned to a company's shareholders if all of the assets were liquidated and all the company's debts were paid off. And we'll go into much greater depth about what that actually means. So with that, I will start off our evening talking about grants. So first off, what is a grant? So as I mentioned, this is traditionally from a government entity, or it can be from a private business. Some foundations and nonprofits also give out grants to small businesses, but it tends to be nonprofits, and foundations tend to look at the nonprofit side of the world. So in some cases it can go to a business entity, but not always. They do not require any repayment, which is very appealing, and definitely something that most startups ask for, especially when they're starting up or starting to think about expansion and thinking about what free money might mean. There are a lot of pros and cons with such money, and as you can see, there are more bullets under the cons than the pros, and this is why we did want to talk about this and make sure that this was top of mind, since we all think, oh, great, free money, grants, excellent. Well, and certainly there's a lot of information about it out on internet, which we all spend a lot of time on as we are currently on Zoom. But with that, there's also a lot of cons that one should really consider before applying for grants. They are very time consuming for anyone that has written a grant. And if anyone has on this group, please let's go with a clap if you've written a grant proposal before, because those are rather time consuming. And certainly, all right, we have at least, a couple folks, fantastic. So you all know how difficult this is, and you are more than welcome to either chime in verbally or through chat about your own experiences with grants, because they are something that I don't have the most experience on, but I did want to bring this into the conversation since a lot of folks, especially during COVID, are asking about grants, given that they are free money. You do need to have a very strong purpose as to why you need that money, how you're going to use it, and you might not know right away. So certainly don't expect to get that money tomorrow, depending on the timelines. And usually they're pretty transparent about what timelines they have. Those are certainly something to consider. And you're certainly, because this is free money, you're not the only one that will be applying for them. So really hone in what it is you're applying for, why, how, etc. As I mentioned, very strict eligibility criteria, especially if you're looking at foundations or small business grants. They often want to know, there have been a lot of grants going out for disadvantaged or underrepresented business owners. So that's been great categories to look into depending on your backgrounds. So that's all leading up to the grant application itself. Then if and when you do get the grant, you can expect a lot of check-ins and reporting. And some might think some strings attached. There might be certain ways that you can use the money, not others. And especially when we think about federal grants, it's taxpayer money that you're using. So there's certainly a lot more around that folks care about and look at. There are a couple of resources that we did want to highlight in terms of if grants are the route you want to go. Look for the SBA.gov or the grants.gov website. There was another one called grantstation.com that is out of Fairbanks, as it turns out. They're very much focused on the nonprofit sector, but they have great resources around how to write a grant and what to look out for. So I encourage you to look at their website if you are interested in applying for grants. And then there is one in particular that I thought was interesting for any women on this call or folks that identify as women, around Amber Grants for Women, having Women of Alaska business grants. So highly encourage you to check that out. And also we'll be throwing a lot of content at you throughout this session. I should have mentioned, we are happy to share these slides after the fact if you don't want to be furiously taking notes, or I encourage you to also take screenshots of the screens so that you can save them for later too. All right, I will take a pause about grants. Any questions or additions to what we have just talked about, what I have just talked about? And please go ahead and unmute yourself if so. All right. Well, with that, I will turn it over to Tammy to go into our loans section.
Okay, loans. Go ahead and advance that to the next. So what do lenders look for when they're looking to fund, specifically in this conversation, a startup? And there's a graphic here that goes over the 5 C's of credit, which kind of shows it's really a very well-rounded view of the business. So we're looking for the capital that's coming into that startup, the collateral, the character of the people running the business, what kind of cash flow does it generate, and also what kind of conditions is it operating within, what kind of market pressure is there, what kind of competition is there. So as you're thinking about your your business startup and your launch, your business plan is really very critical. And you'll hear me talk about the business plan a few times. This is really the narrative, this section of the business plan where you really want to focus and make sure that you highlight all of these 5 C's, because this is specifically what your lender is going to be looking for. They want to hear the story of the how you're building it, the why you're building it. Why are you the ideal person to be successful at this business? That you've looked at your cash flow and you've brought the necessary capital. The other one we don't really talk about in the 5 C's is credit. It really does matter, the personal credit score and credit capacity of the individuals running that business. So another thing that a business needs to be prepared for as you're talking about cash flow, there is a very specific metric, and that's this part of the debt service coverage ratio. So as mentioned, debt is one of those things where it's required to be repaid. And generally your first payment happens 30 days after you close your loan. So as you're going through your financial projections and you're creating those cash flow analysis and you're writing all of this into your business plan, you need to talk about your debt service coverage ratio. And what that means is for every dollar of debt, you have net cash flow available. So gross income minus expenses minus everything else gets you to that net cash flow. Net cash flow needs to be 1.25 to 1.35 to 1 ratio. So you definitely do need to build in that profit margin that you're going to be able to support that business and also carry any of the debt that that business creates. So those are kind of the first couple of points there. The ideal profile. What do lenders really look for as they're reading that business plan? They're looking for a driven owner with a cohesive vision. So you've looked at this, you've thought about this, you've dreamt about it, and you've literally lived in this new business idea. You've thought about every angle. You know what you need. You know who your customers are. You know what kind of everything about the way that you're going to be paid, you've thought that through. You've thought about what kind of resources you need to deploy. So you're really driven and you have a very clear vision. You also have identified the project or what the business is. Why is this business in existence? What is it going to do? And again, credit score. So when the business itself is not established, the business plan becomes so important. As we look at this, credit score, no bankruptcy for startups specifically, that solid business plan. What does that mean? So you're going to someone and asking them to lend money, not necessarily invest, but lend money based on an idea that's not yet proven. So who are you? How are you the best person to bring that idea to life? What does that business look like? What's it going to do? Who are the clients? What's your product? Who's your core market? How are you going to get paid? When are you going to get paid? What's the timeline and the cycle for when you obtain a client and then you deploy your product or service and then you're collecting those revenues? So you really have to have a good handle on all of those details. It's also very important when you're telling that story of why are you the best person to bring this business to life? It's because you have experience, you have expertise. This is an industry you know inside and out. You've either been a business owner previously in this industry, or you've worked for many years and you have industry knowledge in this area. And you can bring that experience and expertise into the success of your new startup. Secondary source of income. What that means is that as you're getting this ready, you haven't made a dollar yet. You're getting ready to open that business and start making money, but you're creating debt that needs to be repaid, and it needs to be repaid within starting in that first, 30 days after you close on that loan. So if you have a job and you have to quit that job to make your new business startup successful, lenders tend to get a little concerned about that unless you've got a good cash reserve to be able to operate from. But if you have someone else in your household or someone else within your business that has a secondary outside source of repayment that can be used to support your business, then that helps with your business plan. Let's see, what else have we got here? Oh yes, so the owner has capital and is able to support that business. So again, that's the reserves. You've got something banked to be able to bring the capital in and go with the debt that you're securing, but then you've also got a bank of reserves to be able to pull from for your debt service and for your ongoing operations. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Types of loans. So there are a number of ways that you can get business finance. Specifically, when we're talking about business startup, one of the things that really, one of the lenders or sources of debt that kind of comes to the forefront is the SBA, Small Business Administration. This is government guaranteed loans that also participate and partner with banks. There are ways that sometimes you can go straight to the SBA, but these loan programs are used to start, launch, grow, repair your business. You can purchase an existing business. You can do some sort of a takeover and then restructure and change. You can use it for day-to-day operations. There are a number of different loan types and loan programs under the SBA umbrella, but having that government guarantee makes it less risky for the business and also for the bank that's participating with this debt. So again, back to the idea that in a startup, the lender is really betting on the idea as presented within the business plan. But in most cases, it doesn't yet exist or is in its very early stages of existence. Having that guarantee from the government helps to reduce the risk and makes it more attractive for banks to partner in debt of that kind. There's also an interesting thing that's happening with SBA debt right now. There are certain benefits that are listed out here, and I would direct you to go to sba.gov for a little bit more information. If you really want to drill down into this, you can see if your business has already existed prior to February of 2020, then you could be eligible for some of the economic impact disaster loans that the SBA has available, or some of the other loan programs that are out there. But definitely go to sba.gov, take a look at what they have, take a look at the number of programs. There's 7A, 504, which is specifically real estate. A little bit of equipment can go in there as well. There's also a micro loan for the smaller amounts. But get a little bit familiar with what's going on there. And then also look and see, does your bank that you already do business with, is your bank already participating as an SBA lender? If so, you definitely want to partner with them. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Again, with the idea of government guaranteed debt, USDA can sometimes be an option in Alaska. It does not work in Anchorage and even certain areas out into the Mat-Su. You really have to get into rural Alaska. You have to be a business that is headquartered outside of the Anchorage area to be able to access lending through the USDA. The state office for U.S. Department of Agriculture is in Palmer. The address is shown right there. It's right on the Palmer-Wasilla Highway. If you're familiar with Palmer, it's right there by Cars, Safeway, and Fred Meyer, right there, Palmer-Wasilla, right off the highway. I've also put up the link here. There are a number of different programs that are out there for USDA lending, and it's a phenomenal program and very flexible, a number of variations in how they structure that loan, depending on who you're partnering with in that rural community. So I just wanted to throw that in there just in case. Again, you do have to be outside of the Anchorage area to access lending of this kind. Then we also have conventional. So conventional loans, that's what you're familiar with. The regular, go to your bank, KeyBank, Wells Fargo, North Rim, First, your bank. Wherever you're already established with your business relationship, that's the bank that you would go to, and you would talk to them about conventional bank financing. And every bank is going to have their own credit policy. They're going to have certain industries that they do or do not lend within. Based on their credit policy and how their portfolio is structured. So you're just going to want to talk to your business lender there. And conventional for a startup, it's probably the most challenging type of loan to put together, simply because, as I mentioned before, we're talking about a business plan often, something that doesn't yet exist. So it relies so much on the business owner. So who are you and what are you bringing into the transaction? Do you have home equity? Is that what they're going to use? Do you have other resources or other access to capital that you might be able to leverage and be able to bring into your business financing? It doesn't have the benefit of the government backed guarantees. So you're often going to find that the terms are shorter. The interest rates are more variable in nature, and it just might be a little bit more expensive, but certainly worth looking into so that you can balance all of the options before you and find out what is the best path for you and for your business. And then I've also listed on here other Alaska specific programs, such as the Alaska Growth Capital or ADA, Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority. So depending on the nature of your business, you might fall into their core lending group. There are certain industries that they're more attracted to. I guess you could say it's more in their business plan. It's in their business plan to finance certain types of business and industry. So you'll want to look at the website for Alaska Growth Capital and also for ADA and just kind of see, does your idea pair up with what their lending structure looks like? Because that could be an option for you. Depends on if you're going to be a manufacturer, if you're going to be doing import export, anything like that that really matches up well with what they're doing. So that is really just kind of 30,000 foot elevation overview of bank lending. There are a lot of variations. This was really just the highlights, but I do want to pause and see if anybody has some specific questions about this area.
Hi, Alan here. Tammy.
Hi.
I'm curious as to the bank loan. Okay, so you got everything that they're looking for. You got the solid experience, solid business plan that you've been working on with other people for 2 or 3 years. You got a backer, somebody like SBA, but you just don't have the credit. Have you ever seen anybody pull something like that off? When it comes down to it, it's pretty much up to the bank, the lender, right?
So the interesting thing about business lending, and one of the things that I loved about it, is there's a guideline, there's a credit policy, but there's really no hard set rules. So for example, most people are familiar with the mortgage lending process, where it says your credit score must be this, or you don't get to move forward. So everything with business credit, it depends. It depends on the story. So if somebody is coming to the table and they have all of these things, but maybe credit score is a little short and it's not quite ideal, why? What happened? Tell the story. Is it a risk? What the bank is really looking for is, what are the risks in us lending this money and in being repaid? What is the likelihood that we would not be repaid? So that's the question on the table. And as long as you can address that and don't try and bury it down in a narrative somewhere, bring the light out on it and say, here's everything we have going on. Here's all of our pros, all of our great attributes, and here's a couple of the negatives. But here's why you shouldn't be worried about those negatives. Here's what we've done. That negative happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever. Tell the story. The business plan is absolutely crucial.
Hey, this is Liam. I'm interested to see Ada here. I guess I wasn't expecting that. So as far, I think about Ada when I think about who finances like roads and ports and oil fields and stuff like that. But I guess, if you've got a business that's focused on rural infrastructure that supports resource development and export, then, it probably is in their mission. Have you seen them give loans to or any kind of financing to kind of earlier stage startups or small businesses, or has it always been kind of the big infrastructure projects that I'm thinking of?
So I don't have firsthand knowledge. And if I do, I couldn't share it because everything we do with our clients at Small Business Development Center is absolutely confidential. But I would say, again, it depends. This is going to be like the standard banker answer, right? It depends. If it fits their mission, if it fits their guidelines, if it's within that wheelhouse of where they operate, then they're going to talk about how to help that business get established. But generally, you're correct. They're looking at big projects and much larger transactions.
Tammy, we have a question in the chat from Candy Fitzpatrick asking if does Dun and Bradstreet have much to do with this process?
It absolutely does. And I won't go into great detail here, but if you want to chat with me offline, I do have a resource available, kind of a to-do list of how to set up a Dunn's number, a Dun and Bradstreet report, and how to start building your business credit, because business credit is very important, especially if you're going to try and do anything through SBA 8A certification to do government contracts. You absolutely have to have a Dun and Bradstreet report. But I do have kind of a guideline and a cheat sheet that walks you through how to get that set up and how to build a better score. Just circle back to me through the Alaska SBDC and I can get that resource out to you.
This is Alan again. I got one more quick question. For small businesses, a secured loan would probably be the best way to start establishing credit through a bank, and then once you got that loan paid off, your money pretty much. Have you ever seen a really good profitable business relationship develop from that secured loan?
I'm sorry, your audio was really cutting in and out there, so I'm not sure I heard the entirety of your question.
Okay, Tammy, sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm curious as to whether a secured loan can help you, small business startup, establish a really strong business relationship through a secured loan. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, absolutely. So for a startup, they're definitely going to be looking at some sort of secured financing to be able to get you started. And there are some ways that you can start out small and gradually pay back and build that credit up, and then start building to larger and larger and larger requests over time. Because again, a bank is really looking for past performance as an indicator of future conditions. So the more history you build and the better your relationship with your bank becomes, the easier it's going to be for you to start getting larger credit facilities, or to even have less collateral requirements, less security that's required of you. Did that help your question?
It sure did. Thank you, Tammy.
Okay. All right, well, who's ready to go on with equity and angel investing? Okay, moving
right.
on. Back to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Tammy, and thank you all for the great questions. Please do feel free to chat with Tammy through Zoom or reach out through the SBDC to her, since they certainly have a lot of great resources to help companies. And if you have a question, you're not the only one who's had it and will continue to have. So please do reach out. All right, so for our third type of money this evening, we have equity. So what on earth is equity? It is essentially shareholders' equity or owners' equity, so part of that business. And the technical definition that I read off earlier is the amount of money that would be returned to a company's shareholders if all of the assets were liquidated and all of the company's debt was paid off in the case of liquidation. So it's, yep, a piece of that company. And if you're thinking about going down the equity route, there are a couple things that you will want to prepare, and we won't go into much detail there, but especially for those that are either applying for or have applied for the Alaska Angel Conference, start thinking about what investment term sheet you might want to present to the investors. And we'll go through a couple of examples to start priming your brains around that as to what should you be asking for. Looking at a capitalization table, so pre and post investment, if that is appropriate. Looking at how much equity does every party involved have? How much do the founders have versus future owners? And I'll say Shark Tank has probably brought this to mind for a lot of folks around, well, they all want 30 to 40% equity stakes in the company in return for a lot more money, but certainly that is to control the future of the company given those higher checks. An investor will also want to look at your financial projections and your business plan, very similar to if you're applying for a loan. We want to know how risky of an investment this is and when we can expect to have that money back if we are investing in your business, since that is greatly helpful for those that are seeking money back on their investment. And then finally, your pitch deck, as very similar to what Tammy said. What is your story? Why are you the best one to make this happen out in the world? And tied to the business plan, financial projections, how fast are you going to make it happen with what kind of money requirements? The funny thing about equity, even though there are even fewer rules than loans and grants do, there's a lot of subjectivity when it comes to equity deals, and it all comes down to what the investor likes or doesn't like and what they can feel like they can bring in terms of value to your business. And that's part of why they ask for the business plan and what your own experiences are, so that they can see, well, what are the connections they can make and what value can they bring back to you? And it's much more of a close relationship with that investor than probably your loan officer might become, because you're leaning on them for advice. They might become an advisor, a mentor, board member for your company, which will all be part of the term sheet of what rights do they have and what are you expecting from them. And to that end, I really advise folks to bring on legal counsel as early on as possible to think about that term sheet and what makes sense for your business, especially given your financial projections. If you expect to really grow your company in the next 5 years, and then you'll be raising more money and either seeking more loans or grants, that might change what type of money you're asking for and looking out for. So with that, I'll dive into 5 or 6 different types of equity investment, standard-ish terms that we see the most frequently, and kind of go into some pros and cons of each. A lot of these are posted on the 49 State Angel Fund's website, 49saf.com as well, if you want to go back to them. But as I mentioned, we'll be sharing these slides, so you'll have them handy and, well, Google and other search engines are always a click or a keystroke away. So we will look at straight equity. What does that mean? What does that look like? Revenue redemption models, preferred equity, so dividends, convertible debt, a SAFE, and a KISS. We'll end on the acronyms. So with that, what is the traditional equity model? Very much the standard deal terms that we might look at. For $25,000, I would like 9% of the company in the long run. So as I receive my returns, when there is that event that happens, then I will receive that 25,000 and more back, and that's the hope. So it's very standard. There isn't much that needs to be going on there. It's much better position for businesses that are thinking about getting acquired in the long run. It is not as much for small businesses that might not have bigger returns down the line. And for investors that are looking for shorter return payments, that's not necessarily what an investor would look at either. If they're trying to make a quick buck, they might have better chance just trading on Wall Street to some extent. So it all depends on the investor and what their profile is. Now, when we think about revenue redemption, it's a mix between equity, as we just talked about, as well as a share of the revenue that you'll be making as a business down the line. So there is a equity stake that is negotiated at first as part of that term sheet. The company starts paying back the investors regularly based on their revenues. Once the investor hits their own multiple and they're like, all right, it's 2 times the value of my investment, that's when you will get back some or all of that equity from those revenue payments. So it is very much, it's a hybrid model. We're seeing a lot more of these. It can get tricky, so I do recommend folks, again, working with that legal counsel to make sure that they're drafting the right terms. It is shorter term revenues for the investor compared to just regular equity, but it does keep that capital available for the company to keep growing over time. And there's only so much, because it is partly revenue based, it does impact your margins as an entrepreneur. So really thinking about, well, how fast will you be making money, and thinking about it more long term in that way. The next model is dividends. If you're thinking about different types of stocks in your company, and this is, would say, it's a little more advanced in terms of equity investments in a company. And if you think about, well, raising $500,000 through preferred stocks, then you will repay your investors an 8% dividend over time once you hit a certain mark. So it definitely is, it's great for the investors to get that money back earlier on. It is not as great for companies if they are struggling financially to get those dividends back, or really to think about long-term growth and investment in the company in that respect. And as Tammy was saying, it always depends. So thinking about convertible debt, and I'll say that's something that we've done a number of times in terms of the 49 SAF and looked at. So initially it looks like debt on your balance sheet, and eventually at a certain amount of time, at a determined date, it converts to equity. Or it can, if it doesn't convert, it is expected to be repaid in cash. So there are certain negotiated times that look somewhat like a loan, but with more options at the end of at that maturity date. So it can be fast to write up, doesn't require too much work legally there. And it doesn't require a valuation of the company, which is really tricky when you have no sense of what the company is worth, since, well, you're still very earlier on in your company. So on the flip side of that, it might not always look great to have that debt on your balance sheet. And if those payments do accumulate, then it might be difficult to repay it at that maturity date. And then you might have to roll over to equity depending on your terms. But it's all not very black and white. There's a lot of gray area in these, and I'd say it's very much to the entrepreneur to figure out what are the right terms and then negotiate those terms with the investors. Next are our acronyms. So the first one is our SAFE, Simple Agreement for Future Equity. Very simple, quick to draft up, and it's more on the entrepreneur's side than the next one, which will be the KISS, Keep It Simple Security. So the KISS is much more favorable to investors. A SAFE is more favorable to entrepreneurs. Both of them are rather easy to draft up, since it is fairly simple, and there are a lot of templates for these online as well. They've been made famous by the likes of YC, Y Combinator. More acronyms there. Y Combinator has made these rather templatized and standard throughout the tech industry, and it very much depends what you're looking at and how you're thinking about it. So looking at all 6 of these equity models, there's, as I mentioned, it all depends what you're looking for. It all depends the amount of money that you're looking to have, your long-term projections for your business, thinking about, well, what are future amounts of money and types of money you might want in the long run, so that you aren't starting somewhere and later down the line, it might bite you to have written a certain agreement a certain way. And this is why I keep emphasizing, for those that have talked to me about their business, I keep emphasizing legal counsel as early as possible when thinking about these, because they will have your back. Investors say they might initially, but in the long run, they're in it for their money when it comes to equity. So this brings us all to the Alaska Angel Conference, which is kicking off very soon. So one type of investing and type of investor are angel investors. So essentially an angel investor, and why they're even called angels, is because they're coming in very earlier on in the business and providing capital to either an individual or a business directly in exchange for some form of equity. And so as we went to, looked at the different types of equity, why I wanted to talk about that first is because angel investing, typically the entrepreneur comes to the forefront to the angel investor with a term sheet or some form of investment terms that they're looking at. And angel investors will come before other types of equity investments. And on the angel investor side of things, which I know we have some on the call, which is very exciting, it is risky. And so for anyone that is doing it, they should consult their financial advisor and understand if this is right for their money. In the case of the Alaska Angel Conference, each investor is putting in $5,000 to $10,000 into a big one pot of money, and that's where the final check comes out of for the Angel Conference. The angels investors typically, even though they want their money back, they're really in it to help start and boost the ecosystem, particularly in Alaska. We have a lot of folks who are very passionate about making sure that Alaska stays innovative and growing, and that we keep moving forward successfully, especially given the current economic state of, well, our state, but also the world. So what does the process look like? And a few of you mentioned that you're either interested in or already have applied. So at this point in time, and Wednesday midnight Alaska time is the big deadline for this. So please do look at it and make sure that you've applied. We are still in the top of the funnel, getting all of the applications in from all the startups, which we're very excited about what we've seen so far and absolutely want more. Over the next 2 months, we will have sessions where we get to meet and network with each other. There will be a lot of pitching by the startups and feedback given by the investors to the startups so that you can improve your pitch and be more favorable down the line. Then the investors will gather all the information they can, go back to the entrepreneurs to ask for information around due diligence. And this is very similar for loans as it is for equity, around background of the entrepreneur, the industry look at, how risky is this investment, either in the entrepreneur. When it comes to equity, it tends to be much more into the people than the company itself, whereas loans tend to be much more in the business and its longevity, with obviously a big asterisk around the entrepreneur and the people leading it as well. But oftentimes you will see entrepreneurs who will spin out of their company, but keep their investors in the long run. So equity investors will stay with them for a while. So after that diligence is done from all the investors who have looked at the business plans, the pitches, looked at all the entrepreneurs and how they're doing, they will vote on at least one winner after a couple of rounds of votings. There will be some negotiation around the terms of that investment. And on the big day in May, I believe it's May 5th, and I'll have to double check. I retract. We are still finalizing the final date. It's around May 4th or 5th because we are waiting for some availabilities to be confirmed. One startup will be voted on to receive that final $100,000 plus investment by our angel investors. And once that check is written, those investment terms will be fulfilled over the next couple of years. And depending on their part of the investment, they will split those returns for that company. And we've had 2 great companies win the last 2 years, Ramper Innovations and Pandier Shoes. So different industries. I encourage you to look them up and see what they're all about. So in terms of a couple more details, I forgot that I had a bullet point list of everything I just spoke to. So here it is in words rather than a funnel graphic. I will add in that some startups have found investments from the investors in addition, even if they haven't won the final check, or just continued mentorship advising relationships with the folks that they have met throughout the conference, which is fantastic for us since we hope to build that ecosystem in Alaska. So for investors, what they're looking at, and for the investors on the call, feel free to add in any other bullet points or reasons why you are investing in Alaska's future. So it's really thinking about the new angel investors are looking to the seasoned investors to get their knowledge about how to make investments. In Alaska, we allow non-accredited investors to join as well, since that is a statewide exemption from the federal requirements around accredited investors. And what that means, if you are an accredited investor, you make over $200,000 in a year and you have, well, a certain amount of assets under your belt. And in Alaska, they've made an exception where anyone can invest in startups, even if they are not accredited and have those financial means. Another advantage to join the Alaska Angel Conference for investors is that they get to see very early stage companies. And we've seen companies that have participated in the last 2 years, have continued that connection with those investors that I mentioned, and even grow and pivot their company over time and really build a network within folks on both sides of the conference. On the entrepreneur side, well, if you win, you get a fantastic check, which is always very nice since the topic of this evening is money and how do we get it. It's also getting a lot of feedback and experience around pitching and working with investors in a possibly more friendly format than you might outside with different types of investors, since investors, for the most part, might really be just looking for their returns. So in this case, you're really grooming yourself and learning the ways to be able to be more attractive to investors in the long run. And as I mentioned, lots of networking and conversations happening across the board. And why should we have such a conference in Alaska? Well, it makes us much stronger as a state and diversifies our economy. Plus, we have a great number of ideas up here. Alaskans like to bootstrap and really figure it out. If anyone can survive Alaska, gosh, you can create a startup. These are not necessarily the most friendly lands out there. They're the most beautiful, but not the most friendly in terms of staying alive up here in some cases. There's a lot of partnerships that are happening between entrepreneurs and investors. So that in and of itself grows the contacts and keeps on going, spinning the wheel of entrepreneurship in our state. All right, so if you're an entrepreneur and are interested in learning more about the Alaska Angel Conference, you can expect to spend a lot of time explaining this investment opportunity with pitches, one-on-one sessions, feedback, etc., with the investors that are interested in hearing more about your company. And if you're selected as a finalist, there will be a thorough due diligence process and understanding for the investors as to how risky of an investment you might be and how favorable you will be. And as I mentioned, the final pitch will be in May, that first weekend of May. Time commitment, it really depends however much you want to put in, but at a minimum, we estimate 2.5 hours a week with at least a 1 to 2 hour session with entrepreneurs and investors going through the education and pitching throughout the process. And then we highly encourage you to start thinking about carving out time to network throughout the conference, since it's a great way to network and make connections, in case I haven't said that enough times. And we want to make sure that you're making use of those connections and that 2-month period to really build up your business. So the deadline is this Wednesday, midnight Alaska time. Make sure to apply today. You are required to add a pitch deck with your application for entrepreneurs. We are still accepting investors. If anyone is on the line and hasn't invested yet and is interested, you must be an Alaska resident to invest in the Angel Conference, Alaska Angel Conference. And with that is a lot of talking on my end. We've walked through 3 different types of funding for startups, and we are happy to open it up to questions on any of these. Either Tammy and I can answer, but I also encourage all of those that are on the line who might also have answers to chime in, since I know there is a lot of knowledge in this virtual room, and certainly here to connect and share learnings. So with that, I will take a sip of water and mute myself while questions begin.
Hi, Melanie. I did a little bit of research last night on equity and how it's paid back. There's several ways to pay it back, it looks like, and it just comes down to you, and it's an agreement between you and the investor. One thing I didn't have time to further research was paid in kind, but I guess that's like in services for like a manager or something, from what I understand. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure thing. Yes, and that is one of the caveats. As I mentioned, there are a lot of different options out there when it comes to equity. In-kind can look like a lot of different things. In some cases, it is. So one example might be crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. If you think about Kickstarter, you might, for example, you might be investing in that company, although it's not quite equity, so that might not be the best example, but thinking about, well, what can you get in return? So it might be goods or services that the entrepreneur puts a value on, and the investor is comfortable receiving that value in the long run.
So if I was selling fish and chips, I could offer them fish and chips for the rest of their life.
If they accept that as a repayment, absolutely. And I might sign up for that. Scott.
Yeah, hi, I'm Scott Bell. I'm an investor, angel investor based in Fairbanks, and my third time through the Alaska Angel Conference this time. Another way that I've seen in-kind contributions, I've seen maybe an office, somebody owned an office building, letting startups use office space for a small percentage equity in their company. I've seen accountants provide accounting services, again, for I would say only very small amounts of equity. That's, you don't want to give, never want to give too much of your equity away too early. So those are some of the in-kind types of contributions that help your business grow, that provide expertise you need. But instead of you paying them cash, you pay them with some of your company. And again, you gotta be careful about that.
Thank you for that input. My next question is for Tammy. Given the condition of the COVID and all, are the banks have they swayed a little towards any high risk loans at all, knowing that our economy is just on the verge of bouncing back?
Sorry, just realized I was still muted. So one of the things that we are now coaching people to do within their business plan is some COVID testing in terms of impact. How agile is your business to pivot in the event that something happens? We want to talk about if you've existed previous and were impacted by COVID, you want to talk about how you adjusted things within your business to overcome those obstacles and those challenges. But they're also asking that we kind of stress test things a little bit. What if something like this happens again? How well prepared are you? So again, it's all about identifying what the risks might be and then how to mitigate those risks. And again, it depends, and it's really all about the industry. And it's about the individuals, the principals, their financial condition, the equity, and the strength that they bring in supporting their business. So yeah, it is definitely a part of the conversation right now.
Great answer. Thank you, Tammy.
And to answer verbally a question that came in over chat from Lana, am I understanding correctly that if our business receives an angel investor, they will own a percentage of our company? And if so, is that for a certain period of time? And as Scott also answered, it depends. And so, yes, it is a portion of the company. And there is some form of event that might happen, an acquisition, or so going public will be what traditionally happens there. Hopefully it doesn't go under, but that is part of the risk of being an angel investor. And that's where really working with legal counsel if you have one, or even setting up different consultations with folks, understanding what the options are to understand what works best with your business and where you want it to go. And if you have questions that you want to ask verbally, you're welcome to unmute or raise your Zoom hand, and I will filter those through, or keep chatting them in and I will voice them. Alan, looks like you might have a question. You, maybe not.
Actually, I got several questions. I just want to make sure I don't want to hog up all the time. You might have mentioned this earlier, but what's the best type of equity for a startup? There's so many definitions of equity. It's a bit confusing. So I was wondering, in your opinion, what's the best type for an entrepreneur? It sounds like it's a negotiation thing once you get involved with angel investors.
Yep, exactly. It depends. It depends how much you're willing to concede for that money.
I'm definitely not the most experienced investor in the room, but it seems to me that there's types of equity where like the straight equity, where the investors are trying to actually own a piece of your business right away. And in those cases, what needs to happen when you make the deal is you need to set a valuation for the business. And so if you've got a very small business, that's hard to do. It's hard to decide how much your business is worth if it's very small, because you have to think about growth and future potential and stuff. So there's a couple of other ones that are better. I don't know if you have ambitions of having a big business or a small business, or you have one right now, but I feel like many of the people who apply to the Angel Conference have small businesses. And in that case, I feel like it's often better to have either a safe or convertible debt or a KISS, because in those cases, you don't need to actually decide what the value of your company is at the time. It's a little bit of a simpler way to get money into your hands, and then you decide the valuation to convert to equity down the road. So, if I may.
Excellent answer. Thank you.
So Melanie?
Much appreciated. Yes, Lana, hi.
Hi, this is Lana. Thanks for answering my questions. I just have one in regards to, actually Scott answered the question and he said that usually the investor owns the equity in the company. So would that, I guess that is part of your negotiation, is how much equity they own, right? Not necessarily all of it. And he states that until it's purchased by another company or goes public. So by going, first of all, what if you don't want to sell your company? And going public mean like in stock trading, or is there another definition of going public in that regards?
So Melanie, I can try to expand that. This is Scott again. Yeah, Lenny, usually as early stage investors and in all investors in early stage companies, I mean, we don't want to own the whole thing. We own a small percentage because we want to support the founder who has the drive and the vision to grow the company, and we will benefit through the success of the founder and the founder's team. The question of if you never want to sell your company is a really good one to bring up, and it's one that investors look at also, because if as an investor we own equity in your company, but you really don't want to sell it because maybe it's the type of company that creates a lot of cash, but maybe doesn't grow in value a lot, but still it's a great company for the owners. But unless there's some way for the investors to maybe have a dividend or something coming back to them as partial owners in the company, they might prefer to do maybe a revenue redemption model where there's an agreement to buy all of the investors' ownership, all their shares, or at least a portion of them, over a certain amount of time so that the investor has a chance to get some of their money back or get their money back. Because as an investor, I've done a lot of investing. I do have companies that are like that. They're strong cash, low growth, and I'm kind of stranded. My investment is stranded in the company, and that doesn't help me because then I don't get money back to reinvest in other companies. Does that answer your question?
It does provide quite a bit of clarification. I appreciate that, Scott.
Yeah, you're welcome. Oh, so when I said goes public means like if it went onto a stock exchange and
Right.
became a public offering.
Mm-hmm. And I get that. I mean, if your money is, if we never sell and you don't, and then you don't get your money back. I mean, if you were to sell as the owners of the company, then the investor would get back their initial investment, correct? Plus any, obviously, the equity that you've earned along the way, right?
Well, it depends on, let's say that I invest in your company and the agreed upon valuation of the company's $1 million. And just for the sake of easy math, I bought 10% of your company. So if 5 years later, the company sells for $1 million, then I would get my $100,000 back, but not have earned anything on it. And if for some reason, unfortunately, it sold at less than $1 million, then my 10% of that, let's say $80,000 would mean I would have lost money. But only if it's, so you can see how my interests as an investor are aligned with your interests as also an investor, but a majority, a larger investor in your own company.
I see.
Does that help?
It does.
Yeah, there's no.
I'm absorbing bits and pieces.
This is Brian. One of the things to think that might be helpful to think about is none of the options are mutually exclusive. So you can combine types of options in the sense of if there's a partial revenue redemption on net revenues, or in addition to a dividend. So as an example, if somebody invests $1 million and says, okay, I would like to charge, when you become cash flow positive, you're going to give me back 3% on my money once you become cash flow positive. On top of, if you sell at any point that you sell or decide not to, if you sell, then I make my equity stake on top of my 2% that becomes back in a dividend, right? So, I mean, that's just a kind of a off the cuff example, but you can combine. Don't think of the investment types as mutually exclusive in the sense of you have to be in one category. You can get super creative, and it really just depends on the investor that you're working with.
I see. And that makes sense because then they're getting their money back plus some.
Plus, and you don't
so.
have to sell. Yeah.
Right.
So it's like, that's the combination.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess the interest, I'll call it interest, is that based off, I guess it could be based off of whatever you want, or is it based off of the amount of money that they've invested or sales of the company, that type of thing? Suppose whatever you write it up as?
Yep, basically all of the above. You can, I mean, the basic rule of thumb as an entrepreneur is make it attractive to the investor so they get their money back, right? If that's like a portion of sales, portion of net profit, plus a little bit of equity, like you want the investor to make their money back because that's good for them, right?
Yeah, everybody's got to win, right?
Exactly. As long as you keep that in mind and how you slice your deal, then that's the most important about getting the investor their money back, and everybody wins.
Right.
And the most
retain as much equity in yourself, though, as that's like the rule number one starting is try to retain as much equity for yourself as the entrepreneur as possible. It's a really important point. Don't give up too much too early.
Great, thanks. I appreciate that, Brian.
All right, Chris, if you want to come up and ask your question.
Yeah, so I'm already set up as an LLC, and I recognize that all of these options do not fall within that, or almost all of these options do not fall within that. So the question I have is, what company setups are required for the angel investment process? Is it a C Corp, S Corp, all them types out of my realm of knowledge?
And there's certainly a long list of those. And it's funny, as we were preparing for the session, Tammy and I were having that conversation of like, well, it does depend in some cases on the company type and how you're actually structured, what might be favorable to an investor or not. In some cases, and Scott might be, and Aaron Baca, who's also on the call, might be able to address a little bit more, speak to what has been done in the past and what has come through the Angel Conference. There are no requirements around what type of company you are, but it will depend, or it will impact the types of investment in deals and terms that you might be able to propose to investors. And Scott and Aaron, if you want to jump in, you're welcome to.
Yeah, so this is Scott. Yeah, so typically it's a C corporation is what we invest in. It's the law is really clear about that as being equity owners in that. Possibly an LLC, but then it's a different type of ownership, and there's some tax implications of being a partner in an LLC versus being an equity owner in a C corporation, which is your basic business corporation. I think we'd have to look at a C corporation is really straightforward. Most of us as early stage investors are used to that one. The LLC, we just want to take a look at it. I think I'd want to look at it more closely, but it's not a definite no by any means. And did you mention any other types you were concerned about, Chris?
I just left it open as to what are the types that are typical, and it just sounds like the C Corp is the typical one for this, but I didn't know if there others to be evaluated.
S corps are usually not. That's when it's like a really part of owned by a family or just one or two people, and it's really a personal, tax wise, it doesn't really work for equity investors to invest in an S corp. That's the only one. The other one in Alaska that we have, that's kind of the group in Alaska that you're most likely to run across.
There might be some B Corps as well. I haven't seen, I think I've seen maybe one.
Alaska doesn't have a B Corp legislation yet. So B Corps are benefit corporations where they allow and actually require the boards of directors of those companies to consider the mission of the company as well as the financial return to shareholders. And so, and that's, each state has its own different business laws and Alaska has not adopted a B Corp yet. I think about 35 states, including Delaware, have B Corp laws, but we don't have one yet.
And in this case, the one I'm thinking about was registered as a B Corp in Delaware and then a C Corp, I believe it was, in Alaska. So doubling up there in terms of where they were registered and how.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
This is Alan.
Hi, Alan.
For the benefit of investors, gaming investors, C Corp would need a president, a vice president, and a treasurer, and a secretary. Is that correct?
Your
sound faded.
Okay, can you hear?
Microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So in order to become a C Corp, you would have to have a president, a vice president, treasurer, and a secretary. Is that correct?
I'm not sure the particulars. You need at least some of those, but I can tell you the truth. I don't know if you have to have all four of those, but somebody else may have that information off the top of their head.
No, it's not as hard as it sounds for a really small C Corp. I don't know exactly what the rules are, but I know a single person who has started a C Corp before, and they were able to do so completely legally and above board. It might be that you did all this, that the same person can fill all those different positions or something if you're of a certain size. But it's not as, it takes like a little bit of research, and it's like a small amount of money for setting it up, but it's not as scary as it sounds. I remember last time we did this, we got it done in a couple hours. So
it was my understanding.
Can I pipe in here? This is Linda James.
Sure.
So we have to think about when we're talking about structures of corporation, as in how it's legally defined, and then what is the taxation system is like, how it's defined for the IRS, right? So you could be an LLC, legally speaking, but you can be paying taxes as a C Corp. What we're talking about here specifically is legally being a C Corp, right? And the difference with the LLC and the C Corp in pertaining to what you're talking about is that it is a lot more formal. There are meetings that you have to take. There's an annual meeting you have to have. Everything has to be really structured, and that's all required. And you can go to the State of Alaska website, and they'll tell you all of that in there. And when you look at the side-by-side comparison to an LLC, it's just much simpler administratively to run an LLC than it is to run a C Corp by any means. But the thing with the C Corp is there's so much precedent with investment in the C Corp as a vehicle. And so investors really prefer that because it's the most flexible vehicle to invest. It allows us to have all of these terms, all kinds of shares in a corporation, when all of these other ones don't really allow us that flexibility. And that's why C Corp is the most favorable status, legally speaking, not for taxation, but an actual legal structure for investment.
This question is for anyone, Scott or Linda. Can the owners become officers of the C Corp? My brother and I both have. I was a secretary for 5 years. My brother was president of a nonprofit organization for several years. Can owners jump in and play that role, or is that up to the investors and the owners?
Linda, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, I can try. So I've personally been involved with LLCs taxed as an S Corp and taxed as a C Corp. I've never actually, and I'm an entrepreneur, by the way. I've never actually formed the C Corp, but I've looked at it quite a bit just so that I understand, what I'm getting myself into. And these corporations can really be managed either by managers or by members, right? There's kind of that differentiation. So I believe that you can be an officer. A variety of people can play different positions, but I also do believe that there has to be a board that's part of the C Corp. That's a requirement for to have a C Corp. But I think like this is just getting to some of the details, and it's one of these things that's just a lot easier to read, black and white, because it's just kind of a memory thing at this point. And I don't, it's not something that I do day to day. So I don't want to steer you wrong, but the state of Alaska has some really, really good clear-cut guidelines on this on the website.
And I'll just expand on what Linda said there a bit. So basically in a C corporation, the shareholders will elect a board of directors, and the board of directors can then select the officers. So, and if it's just two of you who own it, then it's a pretty simple process to do, because the two of you will, you own all the shares, you'll make that decision. But you can see how this expands into being, like a, Amazon or something, where it's a much more complex process, a much more structured process with many shareholders and a lot at stake. But the basic concept is the same. The shareholders. So if you own, if you as a shareholder own 51% of the shares that have been issued, then you basically can control the company. And so mostly, especially with early stage startups, the investors are owning a small percentage of the company and not really, excuse me, and not a controlling interest. But as Linda was saying, the best thing to do is go to the state website, state corporation website, and really look at the differences.
And for anybody who hasn't incorporated yet, really try to think of what kind of business you're going to have, and whether you want the type of investors like venture capitalists or angel investors, or whether you want more to go with grants or loans like Tammy was talking about. You may want to go with an S corporation, right? Because there are benefits to that. Or you may want to go with a partnership because it is much easier to run. So just really think through what kind of business you're going to have, what's the growth potential, do you want to sell it, do you want to sacrifice profit for scalability, for growth, right? Like, if not, then maybe an LLC and like an S corp or just a partnership is the right answer for you.
Google has
That's
a
good.
post article on this. I'm going to stick in the chat right now.
Just echoing a little bit of what Linda was saying. This is Brian, by the way. Was if you are manager managed, you can fill that role. If you're member managed, then you can't fill that role. As far as like the being on the board, because you're already on the board as if you're member managed. So if you want to be able to be open to venture capital investment as an LLC, then really look at the rules associated with being member managed versus manager managed. So those rules are important just as far as if you want to take on venture capital as an LLC. So just expanding on what Linda said, but Linda does really great stuff.
I'm very grateful for all of the folks asking and answering questions. This is great, not to have to just hear my voice this whole time. Very grateful for that. And just goes to show the amount of knowledge and community that Alaskans have around this topic. Brian, you'd asked about knowing what investors look at, what investments they've made, what their contact information they have out there, and how to find that out. And frankly, in some cases, I'll add on to what I wrote in the chat. Crunchbase is kind of the free resource that a lot of folks will use, and you can use page subscriptions to Crunchbase and to PitchBook for further information too. A lot of investors, particularly venture capitalists, guard their information and their investments by design, since they don't want folks knocking at their door or sending emails to their inbox asking for their money. So sometimes it can be by design that they're hard to find. But I will say a lot of investors who are particularly trying to diversify their portfolio or have recently raised funds might start spreading out that information through different networks, looking for different types of investments. And there are informal networks of investors where they share deal flow too. For example, I'm part of a group called Women Investing in a Sustainable Economy, where we will share companies and different technologies that are happening and to help each other look at, well, what is making this world a better place? How can we invest in that? And have different types of investors as part of that. So it's certainly either formal or informal networks of folks that sharing information about startups and who's who. And that's where I see, in case I have yet to say it enough times, the networking opportunities from the Alaska Angel Conference really pay off, because once you land that one advisor, mentor, investor, they will start making those connections for you, since they are invested in your success in the long run beyond financial. So that's where asking folks, 49 SAF, we are always happy and willing to make connections, assuming you have a sound business that has some opportunity, which I know quite a few of you on this call have. We are always happy to help make connections where and however we can too. Brian, does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Great.
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute button.
It seems like they've made it harder to find over time.
Or you have a kid sitting on your lap, grabbing your arm and can't get to the mouse.
That's another option. We appreciate all assistance.
Awesome. Thank you.
What other questions are on people's minds? And if not questions, what learnings have you gotten from today? Any surprises? Anything that you will keep and dig in further after this session?
I got a, can you hear me? Okay, I got a question for Tammy, and are you there, Tammy? Can she
Yes,
hear
I'm
me?
here.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great, Tammy. This is kind of might seem out in the left field there to you, but I watched a movie called Founder, and it was about McDonald's, and they had this gentleman who was in management. Did you see the movie?
I haven't, no.
Okay, well, the manager steps in and starts getting all these investors to invest in McDonald's. And then he finally runs into somebody who knows real estate. He says, all the money's in land. You need to start buying in land. Has there ever been any talk of getting investors together to invest in a company and then have a bank step in once the company starts acquiring more land and becoming substantially more profitable and successful? Does that make any sense to you?
It makes perfect sense. I'm thinking about a model that we have right here in Anchorage with the Anchorage Community Land Trust. So they're not exactly a business per se, but we're talking about an organization that acquires real estate, and they have the Set Up Shop program and a number of other programs to help businesses to relocate into those properties.
Okay, could you read to me your email address real quick?
So it's my name, Tammy, Tammy .Gray, Gray, at aksbdc.org.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
How does one get involved with the Alaska Land or Anchorage Land Trust?
I would just reach out and look at their webpage. I've looked at a few resources there. As you click through and you look at the staff, you can find out who the staff members are and their each one their area of expertise. Some are focused on community garden, some are focused on set up shop programs. So just find the right one and connect with them. And I'm sure they're happy to tell you all about the work that they're doing there.
I'll echo, if you start with one person at ACLT, they will probably find the right person for what you're looking for.
Correct.
I think one thing that's been so endearing, wonderful about joining the Alaskan community is how much folks want to help each other be successful in different ways. And certainly we hope that that continues to be fostered, and ACLT certainly is a wonderful partner, as is SBDC, which is why I'm so glad to have Tammy on tonight's call with me. To answer Penny's question around how entrepreneurs have been funded or have funded their businesses to date, if it's self-funded, friends and family, etc. It all depends, and especially it might also depend how many startups an entrepreneur has. So for serial entrepreneurs, they might have lots of funds that they've accumulated from their past successes, or, well, in some cases failures, but successes, namely in terms of money. And so they might reinvest that in future businesses, or have the investor connections to start off with investors. Oh, all right. Well, it wasn't directed at me. Thank you for clarifying, Penny. I'd say for the most part, we see self-funded folks, and yeah, then growing off of that. But please add into the chat how folks are funded, as an informal poll within the room. What are some of the takeaways from this evening?
I'll put in my 2 cents. I just always like to know what my options are and grow in investments, on both sides of it, really. But mainly, we're starting a business, so that's why we decided to participate in this. And it's always good to see, just normal people as well as investors talking about it and coming together. So I appreciate that. And I think anything that you can learn along the way adds to the success later on, really.
I'm very glad to hear.
Melanie, this is Alan, and I'm a better speaker than I am typer. So what I've taken away from this is there's a handful of people from different backgrounds that are coming together to put their minds together, and it's a wonderful thing when you see the wheels start turning. And I've got some great ideas out of this. When I first started looking at how to structure my startup business, I looked at C Corp. So I'm glad somebody, I think it was Brian that brought it up, or Scott. So I'm glad that was brought up, because I'm going to look into it again. And it's a very interesting session. Is there going to be another one after the conference, or won't be till next year?
Aha, already asking for more. Well, we certainly hope that for the startups that apply for the Angel Conference and get accepted, that we continue these conversations. It's certainly integral to being successful as a startup to figure all these nuts and bolts out. And there's a lot of information out there. My goodness gracious, it's so much. So certainly having trusted advisors and knowing who to turn to with questions is very helpful, and making sure that it takes a village. And so get that village around you and ask those questions. And for those that you ask that don't have answers, we'll go and find them to help you be successful as best we can. We have, so as I mentioned, probably not enough times, maybe too many. The application deadline for the Alaska Angel Conference is midnight on Wednesday night, but we do have one final office hour for the Angel Conference for both investors and entrepreneurs this Wednesday at 10 a.m. Alaska time. So right after the great 1 Million Cups weekly sessions, featuring one entrepreneur and asking from the community how they can help them best, which are always fun and a great way to start Wednesday mornings, led by Penny Gage, who's on this call, and a couple of others over at University of Alaska. So that's been a fantastic way to start the Wednesday with a fresh cup of coffee, and followed by any and all questions that folks bring to the table for one final office hours about the Angel Conference. So you'll expect to see me again there, and probably Scott and a couple of others, so that we can address both investors and entrepreneurs in the last few hours before the application deadline.
How do we participate in that?
Aha, akangelconference.com. Let me type in the link. I've been so engaged in talking a lot that I haven't even done that. My apologies. There is the link. And what we'll do,
Thank you.
absolutely. Any final questions to share?
I'd just like to share some with Lana. I went through the application process last night. It seems grueling at first, but once you knock it out, it's done and over with, and you're applicable. And Tammy, also real quick, isn't there some free courses available because due to COVID that entrepreneurs can jump on and watch?
You're
So-
fading out in sound there.
I believe you're asking about free workshops that are available. And yes, there are a number of resources that are available. If you go onto aksbdc.org, onto the website, click over to workshops, you'll be able to scroll through and look at a number of our workshops. There are some that are always on demand and at no cost. And then the ones that do have a fee, I think you'll see one that's called like a small business bundle, normally $180. That is at no cost through the end of March. So if you see anything in that catalog that you'd like to grab, go ahead and get registered while you can, and then you can go back and watch those later.
And since we've thrown so many resources and information to all of you this evening, we will follow up with the deck and some of these resources so that you have those handy in case you weren't able to write down those resources fast enough. Chris, over to you.
I think you answered it right there when you said you were going to send out the deck. I was making sure that we get a chance to see the slide deck.
Absolutely. And this session is also being recorded, so we'll rope in the recording of this session too, in case there were some sound bites that you might have wanted and want to re-listen to.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, with 15 minutes to spare, thank you all very much for attending this evening's session. It's truly been a pleasure to see all of you answer questions. I am very grateful for the number of folks that jumped in to answer questions, since I don't have all the answers in some cases. And there are folks that are very knowledgeable in different areas. So I'm very grateful for Tammy and SBDC for co-hosting this event, since it's been wonderful having your knowledge on this call, and for everyone else for jumping in. And have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for your help.
Thank you. Awesome.